Okay, now, one of the things I want to point out is mankind at the moment is going through a very rapid science evolution. Technology is driving it. Many branches of science, the people who study those sciences, are not keeping up with the technology. One of those branches of science is archaeology. Okay, LiDAR technology, I won't go into the details of the science of it. Basically, it's usually airborne in drones or aeroplanes. I believe some types of satellites can do it. They fly over a patch of ground, they scan, and it removes the vegetation and you can see what's under it. My purpose and point of this is some of these ancient civilizations like Tikal in Guatemala, when they strip the vegetation off, they realise, holy mackerel, there is 10 times more cities, evidence of civilization and population than we ever realised. And this is coming up everywhere they look. When Dr. Sarah Parchak, who's a very interesting lady who's been pioneering LiDAR, they first did it over parts of Egypt. They did one run over a small part of Egypt in an area they didn't think was very significant. They found over 10,000 new archaeological sites, including what they consider whole towns and cities and whole pyramids under the sand that no one ever has heard about. There's not enough archaeologists in the world just to cover the research of what they exposed in Egypt that time. Since then, LiDAR has been deployed over parts of Central America. This is in addition to hundreds of previously unknown structures, LiDAR images now show highways connecting urban centres, quarries, complex irrigation and terracing. Basically, they're realising these weren't small cities, these were massive cities with massive populations. So we're almost back to now where we were before in ancient times. When I first got into Nexus and it wasn't the first, 1989, I had a series of, what do you call them, meetings, coincidental things. I was researching and traffic information with a guy I call the Fat Man. And yeah, he was fat. And he's dead now, so I can say lots of things. He was one of these people that had set up the structure behind the scenes in terms of databases used by the banks, etc. He was an insider with very, very considerable clearance on certain aspects. And my point is, one day we were talking very vigorously about archaeology and all sorts of things. And one day he gave me some what do you call it, microfiche, what's the old, where you have to put a light over it and expand it up. And I was only able to take this microfilm. He said, take this microfilm home and you can only have it for one night. I know you can't make copies of it and you have to bring it back tomorrow. And I said, well, what's the big deal? And he said, this doesn't exist. He said, I never had this conversation with you, just make sure you bring it back tomorrow. So I'll get home and I'm going for this microfilm. And it turns out to be microfilm of an ancient Mayan codex, one that I've never seen or heard of. And the reason it was classified and kept out of the public domain is because the codex was describing the size of the population and the size of the standing armies. And now, 20 years later, I can see the evidence coming out of this. Now, this is still Guatemala. The point here is that the more they look anywhere in Mexico, Central America, there was millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people living there in organised social structures. Food supply, roads, towns, villages. They started going to look around Angkor Wat at Cambodia. You all know Angkor Wat in Cambodia. And again, they're finding, oh my God, this goes on forever. And it's causing complications in terms of how do you explain the context of this? Has the ocean risen? Where did these people go? How old how old is this? I want to point out to you that a lot of dating methods are as basic and as boring as batshit. But basically, in South America, this is what you would do. You'd find an old stone building that looks like thousands of years old, and unless there's no lava dried on top of it or tree roots to date by, you basically start digging along the stonework until you find ash or a fireplace. And you go, Eureka! The people who made this fire made all of this. Let's date the fire. And that's how so much of the dating literally started. And it's stupid. I mean, if you were a surviving tribe, or if you were wandering through the bush after some natural cataclysm and you found the ruins of an old city, you'd probably start to use some of those ruins for your shelter or the beginnings of, what you're doing, and you'd probably light a fire, and then 1,000 years later, you get the credit for building the whole city. So the Incas, the Mayas, the Aztecs didn't do nothing in terms of the people. They used what the people before them and the people before that came along. Nothing new to you, but this, look, this is all over the internet. Just take my word for it. There you go. And again, the more they're surveying, the more they find. There's the temple. Now, another interesting one here. I put this in because I wanted to get into some of the old legends of the Pacific. Nan Madol in Micronesia, you've all heard of it? Oh, you haven't? Okay, basically in the middle of nowhere in the ocean is this amazing lost city, half submerged by the ocean. It's now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, well, it has been for a while, which means that no archaeologists can really go there and do anything. Interesting fact, you want to see some of the most sensitive sites on the planet, look up a list of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites and where you can't go. Yeah. They did some LiDAR scans around there and they realised, even though I can't show you the stuff in the ocean, under the jungles around there, they're finding this was a much, much, much bigger city. Interestingly, the first people that went there, from the first whiteys that went there and started digging around for bones, allegedly found skeletons of giants 12, 13 foot tall. What happened to the bones, we don't know. A lot of speculation, very hard to get to, although actually it's increasingly becoming more tourists. Nobody knows much about this, there are legends, etc. And again, the archaeologists attribute a lot of this to the people living there now. It's made of massive stone basalt blocks. Very similar to the presentation we did in Nexus Conference by Pratama and Narada. Indonesia, you'll see a lot of these strange pyramids and temples using the same sort of columns. Now that... Oh right, that's the next part of my talk. And there it is too, cool. Okay. Now I know Stella has covered some of this. In fact, I saw some of my pretty pictures on her presentation. I'm going, darn! But anyway, it all works out for a reason. Now, this is my next section. This is a very interesting... You saw this picture with Stella's, but she didn't really go much into it. And I want to just go into a little bit of detail why I find this fascinating. Oh, I've got a pointer here. Right. That's Madagascar, that's Africa. You think by how close they probably were once joined and connected. Nothing could be further from the truth. There's India, there's Western Australia. In Madagascar, you've got a particular creature, amongst others, called the lemur. Very different from the monkeys over there. The lemurs are a very specific type of monkey, and there are plants and there are reptiles, chameleons and things. What's really interesting is there are no lemurs in the whole of Africa, but there are matching lemurs in India. So about 100 years ago, naturalists and scientists, because of the proliferation of insects, reptiles and mammals and things that were there and there, but not there, they suggested there must have been a type of landmass joining the two. In fact, the first name for that landmass was Lemuria, named after the lemurs. Because lemurs were found there and there, they called it Lemuria. And then years later, James Churchward came along, a nice New Age guy with a bit of a New Age following, and he positioned Lemuria, oh, never mind, I'll get to that in a minute. He positioned it out in the Pacific, which is where we call the lost continent of Mu in the Pacific. But what's also interesting about this one, let's have a look. Okay, this is a illustration with some gravity map readings. Now this gets interesting. You've all heard about Tamils, the Tamil Nadu people. The Tamil nation is going through a bit of a nationalistic resurgence. The Tamil people are looking for a new self-identity, and one of the things you do if you're trying to get your people united about your ancient culture is you find evidence about them in the past that makes you feel great and good about yourself. So the Tamil nationalist movement has gone through the archives and they found amazing references to this ancient continent down there. And I might have some of this here. Here's some of their maps from their literature. So the people in this continent up here talk about this continent down here, and I'll get to how the people on this continent here talk about the people there too. And the stories are pretty much the same, and they're very specific and interesting. How long that continent was there, we don't know. But I would say if you had to put a place on the planet where the best evidence right now exists for where mankind was first planted or built or grown, I would suggest it would have to be here or there. And from here or there, they spread that way, and everywhere else. It matches all the available evidence, but let's press on here a little bit more. Okay, this is a recent item just from not long ago. They're finding tools in Tamil Nadu. The headlines all show ancient India, but they're actually found in Tamil Nadu, so I wanted to make that point. 125,000 years ago in Chennai. Some of them there, pretty primitive. But that's an accurately dated layer. That's not what we're talking about earlier. Now, there you go, a bit more about that. Okay, now here's some of the references. I won't pause on here too long. This is some of the references in the Tamil literature. There's also extensive references to this kingdom and continent in some of the Vedic literature. What's really exciting in the field of archaeology is more and more science is now being used to prove some of the ancient texts, some of the ancient Sanskrit texts. So now more and more Indians and more Tamils, but Indians especially, are starting to realise that the gods Krishna and these other people might not have been mythological because they're starting to find the cities and the temples that only existed in mythology. They're starting to find evidence of them under the ocean. Because it's India, it's not sexy and it doesn't make it into Western news as much. If you're into archaeology news, you'd pick up some of this. It's a bit like thinking Troy was a mythical city and therefore all the stories of the great, the wooden horse of Troy, it was all bullshit until they found Troy, and then people go, oh, maybe some of those God stories might be real. If Troy's real, maybe the main characters who are involved with Troy are real. This is what's happening in India. They're starting to revise. There's been a great interest for having Nexus into India, and one of the areas that they're really keen on is for Nexus to push the whole ancient aliens thing. Of course, the Indians want to suggest that they're a bit more the centre of the universe, and the Tamils want to suggest they are. But the point is, from our point of view, there's a lot of data historically in their culture about that landmass. How many territories, the descriptions of the territories. The land bridge there is cited as evidence. I know Stella was talking about it as well. Adam's Bridge, Rama's Bridge. And they didn't get monkeys to make that, but that was, I would suggest that was made after a lot of the other stuff sank, which is why there's more memory of that bridge than there is of the previous continent. This is the Tamil timeline. As you can see, they go back 200,000 years. This is what they're claiming to boost their nationalist agenda. They're not digging up rubbish. It's very, very interesting. Now, there's a mention on here. One of the things that interested me in this literature, I'm not sure if the reference is on there, but the Tamils say that some of the people who fled the continent before it sank went on to become what we call the Jews, or the ancient Hebrews. That's from a Tamil source, which I found very interesting. Oh, look, one other thing too I want to mention. There's a lot of DNA connections between Aborigine people in parts of Australia with those parts of India. There have been Aboriginal people go into parts of Tamil Nadu, and remember there's no writing history, but several Aboriginal people have told me they can speak and understand ancient Tamil without even understanding it. The language connection is there and nobody has really put it together. The Tamil nationalists are starting to establish a timeline of languages, and they do link it back to the Australian Aborigines. Now the reason I put this in, one of the cultural stories from the Tamils and from a lot of the original people is that landmass, the Kumari Kandang landmass, was for a long time run by women, a matriarchal society with very fierce male warriors who specifically cut the heads off everybody who illegally entered their cities or their territories. They were considered a very fierce civilization who over a period of time became advanced and fell into the ways of evil, and so the waters came to cleanse them. You hear that a lot. You hear about some civilization that gets technology, they become self-indulgent, self-gratified, they start to believe their technology is more important than the gods or the creator gods. It's the cultural underscore of the Atlantis myth. We turned away from the gods, we had destruction. The same thing appears over and over again in history, which is why a lot of people are subconsciously expecting it now. So this is evidence of Iran. Don't forget, in ancient times, Iran was called Persia. Iran is an amazing, ancient country with a lot of magic and mystery, a lot of stuff underground. And again, this is a recently discovered city. Incredibly old. That 5,200 figure is considered very conservative, run by women. So there's more and more evidence to suggest that before our history book started at 7,000 BC, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that more of the world's cultures were matriarchal than you realise. Something to ponder. In fact, I've spoken to several Origine people who assured me that in Australia, Origine culture was run by women until about 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. I don't know whether that's a national consensus or whether it was just a couple of people who told me that, but the idea is there, the concept is there. Okay, now we're going to be moving on to a little bit of plate tectonics. One of the things I love in science are radical theories. And no, I'm not going to tell you about the flat earth theory, which I do not believe. I'm going to tell you about the expanding earth theory. This is based on pure science. And what I want to get across to you is, if I can do it. No. Oh, okay. Right. Beautiful. That guy over there, Dr. James Maxlow, he's spoken at 3 Nexus conferences. Like this one, I wanted somebody who was really good on the topic of the expanding earth theory to speak at our conferences, and he happened to be living in Western Australia, and he, in my opinion, is the international expert and go-to guy on the expanding earth theory because he bases it just on science readings. No speculation, no massaging things to fit the gaps. This is the basis of the expanding earth theory. The red bits are new crusts. The red bits are the newest parts of the Earth's crust, the other end of the scale, and there's another picture showing. I want to just let you think on this bit here. This is the Atlantic, this is where Atlantis is supposed to have been. That red bit there is literally, you've got crust coming up, parting and spreading like this. So what's coming up is new. So when you go along with a boat and you date along there, this is new crust, this is old crust. Maybe a lot of you don't understand about, we're a supposed oil-based economy. And you're all taught in schools that oil is supposed to be dead dinosaurs, all squashed up and somehow they just rotted and stuff. That is such bullshit. Do you know oil is formed continuously in every oil well? Oil is a result of those those ancient bacteria, those life forms. It's continually formed. It's a bacterial product. It doesn't mean organic matter is not involved, and in coal and gas, it's a different matter. But with oil, no. Oil is like a type of blood in the crust. It's formed continuously. And the places you get oil today are all on the new parts of the crust. That's where the North Sea oil wells are all up there. Middle East oil fields. All through there's oil. They dig up oil from the newest parts of the Earth's crust, not the oldest, and there's no dead dinosaurs or anything to do with oil. It is absolute bullshit. It's to make you think the oil might run out and you put out fear and you put out more money into the petrol pumps. So, as you can see here, the part of the continent there, this has come up, pushed out, etc. So any landmass is going to be like split and shoved. It's going to make archaeological work really hard to decipher what actually happened there. This is an ongoing process. It means the planet Earth used to be a lot smaller and has expanded. This should replace what we call plate tectonics. You know the idea you taught in school that the continents are plates that float on lava? It's bullshit. They don't. The plates do move. Continental drift is a misunderstanding of the expanding Earth theory. This explains everything about continental drift and it fills in the gaps of the anomalies. Very easy to understand, and again, it's all using science. There's no conjecture, there's no woo-woo at all. This one day will be taught in schools as a replacement to the continents moving around. It still means plates are pushing into each other or not, but this is what's driving it. They don't just wake up and say, let's run into the Himalayan plate and cause a bit of friction. This is what's driving it. This is what's causing it. So the planet is expanding, and it's all sorts of speculation about how big we'll get and whether we'll turn gaseous, which is the next state of matter. We're a matter water planet. A lot of aliens consider Earth a water planet. When you think about it, if you were flying through space and looked at Earth, we're 3/4 water. We'd be called a water planet. So, I mean, water, solids, gas, that's the structure of the planets. There's a bit of an evolutionary thing through there. Okay, this is the more sexy age of the planet map. As you can see, it matches perfectly the expanding Earth theory in terms of where all the new stuff is. Gives you a bit of a... I love looking at maps like that. I had that blown up. I downloaded it, sent it to a local printer and got it laminated. I could look at those all day. I find them fascinating. And you can see down here, I'm going to get to that in a minute. Zealandia, I won't go into that too much because Stella sort of covered it. But this was scientifically discovered again as a lost continent, and I just want to play along on the lost continents theory for a bit. There it is, the same picture she used. One of the, in the prophecies, it's really interesting because several prophets based in America are people who are into prophecies, and we're talking about people who make prophecies in an altered state. They don't sit and write it down, and they were made a long time ago. Several of them said that when it came to Australia, the future for New Zealand is particularly harsh. And I've spoken to New Zealand Aboriginal people, if you can call them Aboriginal people, the Maoris, and there are several Maori elders who've had visions, and one of them went public about it a few years ago, about what he saw for the future of New Zealand. And their government building is called the Beehive. And he saw the Beehive crashing and crumbling and people running and screaming. And he believes it happened in the month of June in one year. Which year we don't know, but every June that comes along I sort of think, oh, we're in June again. He might be wrong, I hope he's wrong, maybe things change. Nothing is fixed in stone, especially probable futures. But getting back to my point, many of the psychics said that in the future New Zealand will go under the waves and then it will rise again as a much bigger continent. And they indicated this before Zealandia was ever discovered in the scientists, before this picture was ever published. So several psychics have seen exactly that, and they said that after New Zealand comes down and goes up, and incidentally, there is a mechanism just here, this fault line there, is able to send massive tsunamis all across the east coast of Australia. How that's going to play out, I don't know. There's another illustration of it. So yes, this could rise again. The Mother Shipton prophecies, which Nexus found a lot of the original copies of, talks about a landmass which will rise from the sea. The Mother Shipton prophecies have an interesting line. They talk about 3 sleeping mountains. When 3 sleeping mountains gather breath and spew out mud and water and death, then basically shit's happening. The 3 sleeping mountains, there are 3 volcanoes in Mexico whose Spanish or whose native name, when translated to English, I think one's called Sleeping Woman, one's called Sleeping Warrior, and one was called Sleeping Infant or Sleeping Child, I think. I put it in Nexus years ago, but one of those 3 sleeping mountains has started erupting not long ago. So I keep an eye out for those things going off. And also for prophecy watchers, the other interesting prophecy a lot of people watch, I notice on the internet, is the Hopi prophecy, because in the Hopi prophecies all their signs have been fulfilled. The railway tracks, the telegraph lines, the mushroom clouds. The only thing in the Hopi prophecy not fulfilled is when the house in the sky comes crashing to earth. The house in the sky comes crashing to earth. Somewhere that people live in the sky crashes to earth, and then basically the waves and volcanoes engulf us all type thing. Some people thought it was the old Skylab. Other people are waiting for the International Space Station to start deteriorating, and then they're going to pack their bags and go to their survival bunkers. Now, I just wanted to go through some dating. Look, this is interesting. I was looking at, I wanted to establish back there in the, let me have a look. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, go back in your minds to that slide with the landmass in the middle. There are a lot of cultural similarities between the Origine people in Australia and some of the peoples in Africa, especially Madagascar. I want to go through them very quickly. A lot of the rock art is incredible. This is African rock art. African standing stones. More African rock art. And there's lots of it out there. People have been documenting it and drawing all sorts of conclusions out of it. They mark areas of sacredness out of it. There are stories, the story of the boab tree. You all know what the boab tree is in Western Australia. It looks like a tree with its roots sticking upside down. The story I was told by people in Western Australia, the boab tree story. Basically, to cut a long story short, the gods got angry with the boab tree, ripped it out of the ground, shook it, stuck it back in the ground upside down, which is why it looks the way that it did. That is the same story in Madagascar and many parts of Africa. It goes on and on. Art, cultural stories, the evidence for that civilization in the middle of the ocean is there. And then we started to get modern scientists going into DNA research. We can now do DNA sequencing a lot quicker and cheaper than we used to. Again, this is revolutionising our understanding of many branches of science. If you're into cell biology, you are already questioning the theory of macroevolution, and you are throwing out Darwinism, because the more you understand about cell biology, the more you realise there's no way we could have any species ever evolved into the next one. It means somewhere back in time, all species were created simultaneously. I'm not saying that God of the Bible did it, etc., but that's the evidence. That is the fossil evidence, that's the evidence today. Not one species has ever been seen to evolve into another one. They haven't found a transitional species. When they do come up with something which they think is a transitional species, it's pointed out it's a species on its own right. You can't just say it. Yes, animals adapt. If you're in a cold climate, your hide will get thicker and you'll make more hair, but you don't go from 2 stomachs to 4 stomachs because of a climate change. Anyway, don't get me started. Okay, so dating. More and more dates are being challenged. Homo sapiens in Arabia by 85,000 years ago. I should preface this. The official out of Africa theory, I believe, is still 65, 70,000 years ago. Man started in Africa, got smart, and around 70,000 years ago we decided Africa was boring, and we went through the Himalayas into Australia, we went through Europe, found our way across into North America. And the more time goes on, the more you just realise it's absolute rubbish. But they haven't changed the history books yet on that bit, and they're still pushing it. There's a lot of political power being held by maintaining the out-of-Africa theory. And this is just one example. They're finding Homo sapiens in Saudi Arabia 85,000 years ago. That's actually used to support the out-of-Africa theory because they were going through Saudi Arabia 10,000 years later. But then it starts to get a bit weirder. This is 88,000... Okay, now this is my little timeline of, pretty self-evident titles. I just wanted to start a sequence of the Australian headlines in the last 10 years. The last 10 years has seen an amazing push in archaeology where the dates have been pushed back. But before that, you would be amazed how many archaeologists in Australia were always grumbling that they could get funding to go and dig up something in Egypt or in the occupied territories or in Syria or somewhere, but could they get funding to dig up and further explore Australians' history? They were not funded, and it was a deliberate initiative from top down to stop archaeologists going further into Australia's history. But a few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, archaeologists started getting funding. And since then, the dates have been going up incrementally. 50,000, 65, 78, 80, and some archaeologists I know reckon it's going to go way, way, way back, but you can only take the system at a pace so far. DNA's coming in, 80,000 years. This is one of the first ones that sort of shocked everybody, and then that's when they must have started having their meetings. 116, 176,000 years ago. That goes back further than 120. There's more sites like this that are going to be turning up in the future. So hopefully they'll keep them coming into the news. Is that my last slide? No? Oh. Okay, this one's really interesting, and it's not that old. I want to point out, look at this, Nature magazine. Look how many authors. Did you hear about that in the news? Philippines, humans in the Philippines, 709,000 years ago. What happened out of Africa? In a nutshell, they found a really clear case of an ancient rhinoceros which had been cut up, butchered and eaten, and all the marks are on the bones, the tools and implements that were there, and they were humans, not hobbits or anything else. The human bones were found, human tools were found in the Philippines 709,000 years ago. That should not be there. And to see that in Nature magazine with so many authors Yeah, interesting. We're in interesting times now. This is more detail about it. Some of them are saying 700,000 years ago. More remains of the butchered rhino. They got great archaeological stuff out of this. Because a lot of our history, I don't know if you know the evidence for some of those theories we've got, I mean, it could fit on a trestle table, and that's the entire archaeological evidence for man starting out of Africa. It's not very much. We're finding more evidence now that man didn't come out of Africa, he probably went into Africa. How much time have I got left? 4:30. It's 4:30 now? I've got 10 minutes, okay. I've got 2 hours, he says. You know I can talk for 2 hours non-stop. You'll fall asleep before I stop talking. Okay, now let me just think what I've missed in all of this with the out of Africa theory. Nearly there we go. There's a pretty one. I like this one. Now, so basically what I'm postulating is whatever was there and is not there now is most likely the official start. However, I've been revising it in the last few months because of the information coming out of this little country here. I'm starting to think it started there and went out a lot longer and a lot further. Hopefully time will tell. There's a few things covered in this, not covered in this conference, that I wanted to also include in this talk. I've had several Origine people over the decades tell me that off the coast there, ancient high-tech cities, buildings made of crystal, pyramids still intact, under half a mile of silt and ocean. The Origine person who told me that told me a lot about consciousness, and he's passed on. Sorry about that. He taught me a lot about consciousness, and he said that these civilizations here, who were around while the Origine people were keeping their culture in there. So you can still have Origine people with their culture, and you can have advanced cities, just like today. You've got people running out there living in mud huts with satellite dishes and mobile phones, but no electricity. And you've got capital cities where down here people are doing all sorts of crazy things, etc. The two cultures can survive side by side. There's no conflict of things. But the Origine person who taught me this is a person who I really spent quality time with. And he filled my head with the connection between consciousness and matter. This is Origine information, what I was talking about, the connection between consciousness and matter. It's not just New Age channeled woo-woo that you can find out there. I'll tell you his name, Burnham. He taught me that every thought and every feeling every human has, as an individual, as a family, as a class, as a grouping, as a clan, as a country, as a planet, every thought and feeling we have goes out and it's picked up by the sun. And the sun radiates it and reflects it straight back at us. And we see its manifestation depending on our state of awareness or whatever. Burnham gave me many examples, this was in the early 80s, of severe weather patterns and political events. And he showed me the connection between the two, the turmoil, the upset, and very interesting. What was most interesting was his claim that human consciousness doesn't stop. It's got no boundaries. It goes out there into the void. And he said one of his concerns was that we're approaching a time where mankind starts to hate himself. That's starting to happen. The inner city green people who've got no connection to the country, you read their blogs, read their posts. Humans are a cancer. We are evil. We are terrible. We are raping and hurting Mother Earth. This tendency, this push towards hating ourselves. People are saying, if I could, I would remove all humans from this beautiful planet. The level of self-hatred is rising. Burnham said when you put out frequency of self-hatred, he said there will be rocks flying through the void which will change their course and crash into the earth because we're putting out a frequency of self-destruction, and the universe likes to fulfill what creators put out in their consciousness. And if creator beings like us are putting out frequencies of self-destruction, we will experience self-destruction. Burnham is not alone in thinking that 2.5 million year ago comet was It was us who attracted it here. We needed to keep learning. We needed to rebuild the classroom, have another round in our ongoing adventure. We are reaching that time. I've looked for it for decades after what Burnham said, and in the last 5 years I've seen more and more Greens and people who identify as Greens. I have no respect for the Australian Green Party. They are not environmental. If the Australian Greens could have their way, you would be compulsorily vaccinated, you would have compulsory fluoride water. The Australian Greens hate natural therapies and alternative medicine and bush medicine. They are the old left of the days of Russia. They used to be the Russia worshippers. And when the Iron Curtain came down, they had no reason to exist, so they just rebranded and relabelled. They had resources and training, that's why they stay organised, while the rest of us green groups, we argue and fight each other all the time, but the Greens were united and disciplined, that's why they survived. But every environment group I was ever a member of, which was every one of them during the 80s and 70s, should have seen my car. It had more bumper stickers for more causes than anything you'd ever seen. And like many of you, I'm not saying I'm the only one, I know many of you are the same, but the Australian Greens are not representative of it. So I went to them thinking, they were supportive of alternative therapies. I tried to get a Senate commission of inquiry so that people who had been muzzled by the legal system, those natural therapies cases like Pan Pharmaceuticals, which all turned out to be bullshit. That guy was totally innocent. It was a setup, a stitch-up for Pan Pharmaceuticals, an attack on the alternative health industry. When they settle out of court, they're not allowed to talk about it, but a Senate inquiry can overturn that legal muzzling. And so the only way you could get small to medium-sized health food businesses to tell the world about how they'd been literally shut down by the system was to get a Senate inquiry, and the Greens were the least of interested in it at all. Only one Australian Democrat at the time responded favourably, and she was interesting. She said, Duncan, she said, I hear your call. She said, you're not going to get any letters from any other senators. She said, least of all from the Australian Greens, but she said, I want you to know, she said, that most of the Liberals and the Labor senators and politicians personally use alternative therapies in their lives, but they will never talk about it because they are shit scared of pharmaceutical companies and their lobby groups and their spies. Just so you know. Yeah, so you can really help them out. Now, what else was I going to say to you about all this? I've gone off on two tangents and I've forgotten which road I was on now. Consciousness and the matter. Again, so I want to finish this, I want to get to the end of this talk by linking what Burnham said about consciousness. I believe that the Origine prophecy is all about consciousness. The reinforcement of the phrase, do not be in fear, is definitely saying, do not broadcast that frequency. Find some form of peace. Find it now. Find it. Imagine you're going to have a tidal wave and you're going to lose everything and everyone you love next week. Find a state of peace where you can cope with it right now and practice getting into it. You might find that one day it might even deter it from happening. You might not need to experience it if you find the peace beforehand. There are a lot of possibilities in the future, and I think this is some of the most exciting times in the entire history of the planet for that reason. There seems to be a lot of interest from star peoples, not just ones connected genetically to the Origine people in this country, but other star peoples from other things. The 10,000 years where the gods have left us to see what we're going to do has come to an end, and there's going to be a lot of them coming back, and there's going to be a lot of confusion, a lot of fear, and a lot of changes, and some of that will manifest as physical earth changes. If you look at the earth like a human body, you all know your emotional happiness, head, heart, gut state affects the health of your body. It's no different to the health of the planet. And in terms of the health of the planet, I don't want to depress you, but decades ago, there's Europe. Decades ago, they went into the North Sea and took random samples of ocean water at different depths, went back and analysed it. Every sample they sampled, heart drugs, pharmaceuticals in the water supply, everywhere, different levels, different types. They freaked out and changed some of the nature of the pharmaceuticals so that they were more solvent and absorbed and less goes through the system, but it's too late. They started doing surveys of groundwater in the wells across Europe. Everywhere they went, nicotine, caffeine in the water, more drugs. Then they went to the air above the Alps, thinking, okay, what's in the air above the Alps? Every sample of air, all the mountains across Europe, this was 20 years ago, every sample of air came up with traces of cologne and perfumes, aromatics. So we've really shat in our own nest. But Earth is a resilient mother, and she is happy to put up with our squirming and our shaking as long as we wake up and learn from it. And that's, I think, where we're up to now. So on that note, on that wonderful slide, I'm going to thank you all for coming to this amazing conference. And my thing just decided to do a runner. And did you just turn me off because I was out of time? I told them. So yes, thank you all very much for coming.
Don't you go anywhere. He cannot go anywhere, can he, just at the moment? No. Duncan, I've got to say, this has been awesome, this conference. But, it is awesome because we finished with you.
No.
Okay?
Okay.
It's been my privilege to work with you, and thank you all very much. Duncan, I'll let you close officially.
I turned it off.
Don't worry, just talking to that one there.
Okay.
All right, okay.
I feel very awkward. Look at this. It's all broken. Okay, official closing. I officially say thank you to all for coming. I want to acknowledge the Origine people who came here and gave their energy and support. When I asked for this conference, I specifically put out the feelers. I wanted people to speak about the end of days. I wanted people to speak about the Star Law connection. I asked people like Stella to go out and asked her to get permissions if she can. And there are many Aboriginal elders from many tribes and clans who gave her the permissions. And I'd like to say officially thank you to all of you who gave the permission. I want to say to you, please go back, not just Origine people, everybody, go back out there and spread the message. All people are interested in this information. Some of the greatest secrets and mysteries of our ancient past, the answers are found here in Australia. How to survive the future changes, the answers are found here in Australia. But the key and the knowledge holders, the custodians of that knowledge are the Origine people. So we need the Origine people to make this information more available. It's time for some of the secrets it's time for some of those secrets to be seen like the crutch, where you need to move on past it when it's served you into the new times. We're entering those new times. Some of those secrets contain information we all need to know. Other secrets, we can respectfully keep them secret. There's no need. But this is the time when we need to share information. The Origine culture needs to stop fighting with each other. It's very simple. You all know what I'm talking about. You need to unite. We need your knowledge. We're going to be asking for your knowledge. I'm going to come to you and I'm going to ask you more questions. I'm going to ask for more representatives to give permissions, and if possible for some of the Origine elders to come and speak more on stage on this information. So be warned, be on the alert. Duncan is coming and he's going to be asking lots of questions, because I'm just a person who represents millions of people who want to know, and that's all I am. So again, thank you all officially for coming. And make sure you tap into Nexus magazine. We have a free email list, but nexusnewsfeed.com. It's a free alternative news service we created. Anyway, I'm not sure. But what I'm saying is, if you sign up to the free email list or get on Nexus Newsfeed, you'll be kept informed of other events we do of this nature. I don't intend to do future events of this nature in the cities unless Spirit says it absolutely has to happen. I intend to do more of these as 1 or 2 day events in regional areas. This is so the Origine people can get there. I've been contacted by many Origine people who would love to be here, but they can't leave their land because they're custodians of knowledge or law or sacred trees, or they just get so sick when they're in the cities because the frequencies are disparate. So in future, we'll be going to more regional and rural areas to get this information out. We'll be asking permission, and every time we wish to be respectful, we wish to learn, and yeah, stay tuned. Thank you all for coming.